You talk about nature being this ultimate pattern for farming. Can you go into that and how Polyface Farms kind of really embraces that idea of letting nature guide?
Sure. So when we came here to the farm, I was just a little kid, and so we're struggling with what how do you farm? How do you intersect with the land? What is the stewardship mandate? And so I can remember well, Dad bringing in experts that told him to plant corn, graze the woods, build silos, borrow more money, use chemical fertilizers. Well, my grandfather was a charter subscriber to Rodale's Organic Gardening and Farming magazine when it came out in like 1945. Always had a big compost pile and was of the non-chemical ilk, and Dad got that from him, and so Dad didn't buy into that approach. But then the okay, so we're not going to do that. We're not going to do the chemical route, but what's the alternative? And began studying. Well, how does nature work? And you start looking around at nature, and you realize, well, okay, animals in nature move. Animals move. They're not in confinement houses. They're not in, and they move. Well, as soon as you posit animals move, well, now you have to have mobile shelter, mobile water, and a way to control them because your neighbor doesn't want your cows. And so you've got to be able to put them where you want them at a certain time. So we began looking at the work of people like Andre Voisin in the 1950s, who wrote Grass Productivity. He's still considered the godfather of modern, managed grazing, and he was an astute student of uh, herbivore choreography, if you will, around the planet, and realized, oh, okay, these wildebeests move, the bison move, these things move, and so we began using electric fence, and we developed portable shade structure called a shade mobile, and we started installing portable water. We now have 12 miles of gravity fed water from permaculture style ponds that gravity feeds over the whole farm. So we have nice pressure water without pumps and electricity over the whole farm. Um, and so that was one, animals move. That, I mean, that people say, well, how'd you get so creative? Well, it's just a simple phrase, animals move. And then that that assumption automatically creates, well, we have to build around that, around that concept. Number two, soil is built by carbon. It's not built by chemical fertilizer. It's built by things that grow and decompose either intestinally or microbially or both. And so how do we develop more carbon? So we began composting. So where most farmers would buy, chemical fertilizer, we bought a wood chipper and went to our woods and began weeding the woodlot of diseased and crooked and junk trees, which freed up the good tree, like weeding your green beans, freeing up the good trees to grow better. And that biomass then became the carbon. We called it a carbonaceous diaper. Um, and we began doing large scale composting with that and applying it. Um, so we started building ponds, reducing surface runoff, increasing organic matter. So we've gone from 1% to 8% organic matter since we've been here, and so those were critical. And then another one was simply that, well, animals, you never see a monospecies or a monocrop or a mono anything. Nature is highly diversified, whether you see, plant guilds and plant communities, or you see animal communities. You see, you know, um, um, squirrels and voles and birds and herbivores, they're all in proximity. So we began, well, how can we leverage what each animal can do? And so we began building portable chicken houses. We called them egg mobiles that follow the cows to mimic the bird that sits on the rhino's nose, the egret on the rhino's nose that's picking the bugs out. Well,
Mhm.
chickens are birds, so birds follow the herbivores and pick the bugs out of the manure and scratch it around the field. And starting using animals to do the work. We use pigs to do our composting aeration, to turn the compost instead of machinery. And then finally, I would just say that as we looked at nature, we said most most systems are kind of locally cyclical. Um, they don't. I mean, there's always been a global trade in things like spices, the spice routes and things like that. But people weren't trading. They weren't going 1,000 miles with a watermelon. It was a more the cycles were shorter. The circles were tighter, and so we began direct marketing. And so rather than trying to sell into a commodity thing that eventually, goes to Walmart on the other side of the country. Instead, we began direct marketing, branding, and value adding, and trying to get that retail dollar. So we wore the middleman hats rather
Hmm.
than just being a wholesale a commodity producer. We became the processor, the marketer, and the distributor, which got us off the treadmill of having to get bigger in order to stay in business by wearing those value added hats. So those were kind of some of the patterns that we saw in nature, and as we developed them on the farm, they ended up nature uses those patterns for a reason because they're very efficient. They take less capital and less machinery, less energy, and they just work better.
Nature is our greatest teacher, and it's the arrogance to go against it sometimes that humans, fault. And